Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast. It is, as always, wonderful to have you along with us, and it's wonderful to have some people along with me too here, sitting here in the Third Space studio. It's not too cold today. Stu, regular co-host, haven't been on for a couple of episodes.
Yes, that's
but
true.
You're back.
Yes, I am.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Are you feeling well prepared for today?
Very well prepared.
Excellent. And Joey is joining us on the podcast, our pastor at Ryde. How are you, man?
Yeah, great.
It's great to have you on. Thanks for being willing to come on.
Yeah, excited.
Are you? Yeah. Excellent. I hope so. Well, I hope so. Let's go. Before we start the podcast, though, this is the podcast. The podcast has started. I realise that I've got the wrong lights on. It's from our Chip Lunch podcast. So if you do want to hear about people talking about their journey with God, then you can listen to that podcast. That's our other podcast, our sister podcast, as people like to call it. Joey's been on. Yep. Stu, you haven't?
No, I haven't. No.
Yeah, we think we're saving you for episode 100.
Oh, right, okay.
Which I think we just recorded.
That's how old I
am? Not necessarily. We might make those jokes when we're on there. But I think we're up to episode 93, so you'd be up soon.
Oh, there you go.
That would be
I don't think my story
really
is particularly interesting.
Oh, that's what everyone says.
I just fell into the trap, the Christian testimony trap. Mine isn't very interesting.
It's not. What is it? Yeah, I don't have a very special testimony.
Yeah, that's right. But I'll talk for half an hour about myself.
Yeah. It's not half an hour. People love talking about themselves once you get them going. Yeah.
They end up all being so good. Yeah, I haven't listened to all of them.
Thank you.
Like, they are, people come in saying, I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah.
And then you listen to it. And it's like,
it's actually
been working and it's awesome.
Yeah, it's actually the easiest topic to talk about is yourself.
Yeah. And how God works through you and you can give praises to God. It's good.
That's and that's the idea. We're breaking down the barriers of, the Christian testimony trap of it's not interesting.
There you go.
Because we find out it is everyone's.
That's a worthwhile life ambition.
Yes. Didn't start that way, but I'm happy to do it. We often start with a cultural artifact or like a movie or a show we're watching. And Stu, you found something called jackhammer farming.
Yes, jackhammer farming.
And how does that work?
Well, so we've just been talking about it before the podcast, and we watched a really cool video on it, which we might even be able to put a link to in the podcast.
Definitely.
Basically, there's a lady who lives out at Lightning Ridge, which is about probably about a 10 or 11 hour drive from Sydney, northwest, nearly on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. It's famous for opal mining. It's a semi-arid context. The town's in a very dry place. And there's a lady that wanted to grow a tropical garden in the midst of this place. And so she came across this approach called Syntropic farming, which she learnt from South America. I can't remember the name of the gentleman that initiated it.
It was Eric Gertsch.
Eric Gertsch.
I think so. Was he South American? Anyway,
he
you
was
keep
a
going.
Swiss guy who invented it, and then someone in South America
picked it up in South America.
There you go. Yeah. So anyway, this guy. Okay, so a Swiss guy influenced a guy from South America who came over to Lightning Ridge. There you go. So Lightning Ridge, she lives there, and I visited Lightning Ridge. It is a very dry place, and it has particularly hard soil. So she came up with a phrase for her gardening technique called jackhammer gardening, because she has to literally get a jackhammer to break up the soil before she plants plants. But the take on it, and I'm not an expert on it, and I've only just started looking into it, but it's fun to talk about. Syntropic farming is where you actually break up the soil and plant things that would grow in situ. So you take the grasses or the plants from Lightning Ridge that'll grow, so it's common sense, but actually that also includes noxious weeds.
Noxious weeds. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Noxious weeds like prickly pear, which is not common sense. Like, you don't usually grow weeds in your garden, but this lady's basically starts with grass and weeds, as I understand it, and that begins to grow. So the idea of it is you grow what will grow rather than what you want to grow, which probably won't grow. Anyway, she grew all these weeds up, and cut a long story short, she created this whole ecosystem that had a syntropic relationship. All the plants were relying on each other. And for example, the cactuses were like water wells for the garden, for example. So if you actually wanted to grow a banana tree, you don't start with putting a banana tree in the ground, because it wouldn't grow out at Lightning Ridge.
Well, that's the traditional approach of gardening, isn't it?
That's what I suppose it is. Yeah, you put your banana tree in and you water it and you put fertilizer on it and hope it'll grow. But this idea is you grow what will grow, and then in the midst of that, you actually plant your banana tree, and the banana tree grows, and they've actually got a banana tree growing in a rainforest now. It's amazing. I don't know what you guys thought, but when we watched the video, it was quite cool.
Yeah, Joey, what do you think?
It's amazing. You just got this huge patch of tropical kind of plants and trees growing in Lightning Ridge. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Amazing how it all kind of started from weeds.
Weeds.
Yeah.
I went after you showed me, Stu. I'm like, I'm definitely going to show my wife because she's really into gardening and stuff. She really enjoys it and finds it really relaxing, and I couldn't care less. But but also the thing is that I appreciate
feign interest.
Well, I don't feign interest. I go, you're really good at that, and I can see the results, but I don't want to do it.
There you go. Okay.
And I think
that's very good.
I have a lot of respect for people that do that. And what was interesting was, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, Stu, is that they said it's growing what you can grow so you can grow what you actually want to grow.
Yeah,
that's what they were saying, which is really fascinating to do. And she said, I've been doing it traditional way for 18 years and I had to find a different way of doing it. She'd been like slogging away trying to build gardens in the traditional way of just planting it, watering it, and we'll just keep watering it and see if it works. But then even the host of the show said if you brought a banana tree from somewhere else on a truck, it'd probably die on the way to Lightning Ridge.
That was a good
Wouldn't even make it.
Yeah, because it is so arid.
Point.
Like the climate is so poor. So I thought it was a really good way to, thanks to you, Stu, of finding it, of like laying a foundation on what we can talk about today, which is kind of church planning, growing small churches, and those kind of things. And and one of the reasons we've got Joey on the podcast is because he's been part of that. So, Joey, do you want to just give us a little bit of background for people who don't know too much about a Ryde gathering? You are the pastor of the Ryde gathering, as we said. And can you remind me, how long has it been since you came on board at Soul Revival?
Since the beginning of last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're like a year and a half in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we've kind of told the story of Ryde, how it was prior to you arriving, but it was important to bring a pastor on board at a certain point because we started growing. What were your initial impressions coming in, and what were you thinking, and why did you want to actually join Soul Revival to be part of the church plant?
Yeah. Initial impressions, I guess it's good to start back with being close friends with some of the really core members who started the Bible study kind of pre-COVID, just before the first wave of COVID. And amazingly, God grew that Bible study during COVID. And then they got to a point where they were like, what do we do next? What's our next step? Because this Bible study has grown. Friends have been invited. People have become Christians, which is amazing. And it was at that point, I think they were starting to talk to Stu about what the next step would be. But being friends with, I think, some of the core members, that was my first point of contact of hearing about what was happening there. My first impression was like, I don't know what this is. Like, I was still studying at college and going, oh, like, it's amazing. Like, you guys are just getting together, reading the Bible, inviting friends. But what is this? And it wasn't kind of towards the end of nearly wrapping up college, finishing my studies, that Ian, one of those core members, came and talked to us about considering this kind of wild idea of church planting. It was never on my radar, kind of coming out of college. But both Mary and I were open to seeing what God would place before us, what the needs were just around us. And so, yeah, that was when we started to have chats with Stu. Really enjoyed visiting here, getting to know the people at Solis. And yeah, that's kind of where it began.
I think the first time I met you was in Grace and Michelle's, who were part of the core team, in their lounge room at West Ryde when my son and I came over to visit one time, right? I think that's right. Yeah,
that was really cool.
I don't think we chatted for very long, but it was like, that was the first time.
Yeah.
You had obviously been a part of it for a little bit of time prior to then. Is that right?
I think at that time we were still just visiting. We were just kind of getting to know what this was, heading to Grace and Michelle's place. We had pizza that night, and I think they were still streaming a service, actually.
Yep, they were.
At the time.
I remember. I think you preached that night when I watched you from afar.
Possible.
As a senior pastor, very possible you were preaching. But as at that point, senior pastor Stu, you've been involved a lot with the Ryde plant, of course, because you're the senior pastor. What are you able to kind of lay out just briefly the reason that the thought was Ryde gathering had been going, but we thought that like having Joey come on board was an important step. What was that?
It was awesome, actually. because we had started the Ryde gathering just before COVID, as Joey said, with Michelle and Grace left our Sunday afternoon gathering, and Grace was moving to Ryde, and she said, is there any way of staying friends? And so we went and chatted with Archie Poulos from Moore College, and we talked about would it be a good idea to plan a Bible study so far away, and the idea was, what if we planned a Bible study and that even might become a church plant? And so it was really, let's plant something that might grow where, what was the phrase from the gardening thing?
Oh yeah, was it grow what you can grow so you can grow what you want to grow?
Yeah, that's why I thought of the Syntropic idea, because that's what we did with Ryde. We grew something that we could grow, which was, we were really close, Michelle, Grace and I. And so Grace then asked a few friends to join a Bible study, including Ian and others. And that started to grow, and Iris and Charlie were the first two people to become Christians in that Bible study, which was really exciting. And when they got married and asked me to marry them, it was really lovely that because I can't speak Chinese and Iris's mother isn't great with English, we thought we'd have a bit of fun with that at the wedding. And so her mum was in Shanghai and we phoned her over FaceTime, and when you get to the point of the service where you say, who gives this woman to be married to this man, I said that in broken Mandarin, which I was still practicing right up until the start of the service, and some of the guests actually asked me to give it a go, and they just didn't actually dispel my doubts because they had a good giggle after I said what I said. And
can you do it now?
I can't remember how to do it. Yeah, no, but it was really fun, and everyone thought it was a fun idea. But the other funny thing was Iris's mum couldn't speak English great, so I was going to ask her in Mandarin, who gives this woman to be married to this man, and she was going to answer in English. So we all had a really lovely moment where we're all coming together like that. So that was a really beautiful example of how organic it was. And so, yeah, a Bible study is not super impressive to the world, and actually in the church planting world, you're not really considered to be a church plant or a campus of a church plant until you get to about 50 people. So really, like a small Bible study of 6 people or 7 or 8 people isn't really considered to be a church plant. But I think what I like about that cultural artefact we began with is a garden of weeds and prickly pears and grasses isn't usually considered to be a garden either, but it's actually really essential for that foundational step to be really something that could be built on. So we got to a point where we were big enough to not meet in a lounge room anymore, so we were worried about that, and we were kind of aspirationally thinking it'd be great to start a formal service, but how do we do that without preachers? And so we had a few conversations about it, and Ian talked to Joey, and then it was really lovely actually, because Ian said, probably would have been good if I talked to you first, but I went and talked to Joey and asked him if he's interested to come, and he'd like to come. And I think you're pretty laid back and you'd be cool with that. I'm like, yeah, I'm cool with that. And then he goes, so could we put Joey on as a senior, as a pastor rather, an assistant pastor to lead us at Ryde? And I said, that'd be unreal, but how are we going to afford it? And then to my amazement, the 6 of the core team in the Ryde team said, look, we're really happy to give to fund that. And we were just blown away right across the church. It was just such a magnificent example of putting a banana tree on a truck and bringing it from the city to Ryde.
That didn't die.
Yeah, that didn't die. But
just got there.
Mary and Joey are far more impressive than a banana tree. But it was like, how do we plant something strong and stable like a fruit tree in the midst of what we've already got to start a church plant? So I've been eternally thankful to Mary and Joey for their faith. I remember we were talking to each other a couple of times over the internet. When Joey and Mary did join, it was a really hectic year for us because we were really flat stick, as many of you probably were coming out of COVID. We found that coming out of COVID was even harder than being in COVID because we had our leadership teams decimated. And the thing I felt really bad about is we didn't have our leadership structure set up. So these poor guys are trying to work out how to plant a church and try and understand soul revival and be at distance while we were still nebulous and trying to work out how to reform as a church. So, yeah, hats off to Joey. I think you're a very humble and patient man. And anyway, so Joey and Mary joined, and it's very exciting that we launched earlier this year. So it's very exciting.
Do you want to describe that process of launching, Joey?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of last year when I came on, they had just found the location where we are now. At,
Grace talked to the Presbyterians, didn't she?
That's right. She had a friend there. They had the hall available. And so that was, just kind of God working through that. And so that was it. Even before I'd come, they had kind of found this place. And that was, I guess, a point where they were ready to start some of these services. And we started slowly. I think that was really wise, like Stu was counseling us to start, but to just be okay with experimenting, working things out slowly. And I thought that was really helpful. So I think originally we were starting perhaps fortnightly. I think that was the case before we went to weekly. And that was really helpful to have some time to do a service, get together, reflect on it, think about what we were doing. And I think that was helpful for us kind of, just starting off as a church plant. Helpful for us, for Mary and I, kind of just finding our way and getting used to what was going on there. And that was, I think, for that year, pretty much, from I think about March to beginning of this year, that was almost seen as a bit of a soft launch. We were welcoming people, so kind of inviting friends to just come visit, to hang out, but still using that space as a place of experimentation, gathering together, sitting under God's word. And so I think that helped to kind of steady things, to for everyone, really, the whole congregation, to kind of go, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the vision. This is how Soli's kind of is thinking about church and community and evangelism. And so that was a really helpful time. Yeah.
How was, just you said, like, it's good to be experimenting at that time. How are you yourself with experimenting, and the guys that are part of the congregation there as well?
Yeah. I think for me, coming out of college, they were constantly warning us in terms of just letting us know, how ambiguous ministry would be for any kind of situation, whether it was for an assistant minister position at a larger church or a church plant, but particularly a church plant. There's just, extreme levels of flexibility required, a lot of ambiguity. And so I think in my mind, theoretically, I had that quite set. I was like, this is going to be really, ambiguous. Things are going to change a lot, and I'm going to have to be kind of okay with that and prepared for that. And to some extent I was. But I think you can, but you can, I think until you get into that experience, until you're actually on the ground, and you're with people, and pastoring people, kind of bumping into all these really practical things that happen within church and within relationships, then you kind of, I get what you mean. I get what they meant by really ambiguous and having a lot of flexibility as a pastor. So I think I guess that was really a very practical learning space. And separate from all the theory, it was kind of like, okay, like this is, it's game time. Like, we're doing this now.
Slightly different, because you're from, used to work in architecture beforehand.
Yeah.
Is it very different to that?
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. Although I guess in architecture, there's always you're always prepared for a lot of change as well. When you're engaging clients, when design kind of shift, when construction doesn't go as it's supposed to, then you also have to be quite flexible and adapt to the situation. So I think there was part of that training was helpful.
Okay, cool. What about, do you like designing stuff for the church though?
Well, I don't know how much we're allowed to do really at a rented church hall. I've been thinking about it. But definitely, I guess there's definitely times when you go, wouldn't it be great if to be able to dream a bit? And I think that's a nice part of church planning. You get to dream a bit, kind of envision what a space could be, what your congregation could be. And so there are times when I do that, but I guess practically there's probably not much we end up doing.
Yet anyway.
But even just little things at the beginning, we experimented with just orientation of the church hall. We were
just which way you were facing.
We were facing the stage before, but we realized as we were thinking just about the little things about welcoming people into the church, how they come through to the kitchen, to the coffee machine, how they get welcomed by the others. what kind of space allowed people to see each other, like as they're singing, as they're gathering together, just that shift to make it a horizontal orientation. Little things like that just end up, I think, helping the congregation to grow and to think about being in community together.
That's actually like even the horizontal, like going the different. It's actually what we're doing. Like,
that's right.
No, people can't see it on the camera, but it's actually what we did here as well, wasn't it, Stu? That when we came to the factory,
Kind of works, doesn't it? Horizontal. Yeah.
Was it ever a vertical?
I think we
thought
tried
it at a wedding. The first thing we had here, actually, funnily enough, was a wedding. Dan and Renee's wedding, and we did that long ways in the other room, actually, because we weren't even ready in here. And it's nothing like this. It didn't work at all. In terms of relationality, it's like, you've got people sitting up the back who don't feel a part of it, and the people who are right up the front kind of feel like everyone's looking at them. So it's sort of a better thing to have it horizontal if you can, I think.
That's just an interesting learning point from that. Stu, Joey talked about the ambiguity that ministry creates, or there is ambiguity within ministry. In your experience, and you've done ministry for a very long time now, how do you deal with the ambiguity? What's your approach to that? I feel like your personality can deal with a fair bit of ambiguity itself. I
think that's very true. I think the thing about church planning is it's deliberately looking for a new idea without throwing out the gospel and changing the gospel, but looking for new ways of doing church. And so it's very experimental. So it's iterative in its design. So I think the way I cope with that is that I think that we will discover a better way of doing things as we work on it. And then down the track, the next stage probably won't be as fraught because we'll have worked a few things out. And then the next stage will bring some problems. And then the stage after that won't be as fraught because we'll have worked some more things out. So I think for me, I enjoy the challenge of building something to be less ambiguous, but to start from nothing is a passion of mine. I really do like starting from nothing. So, and I've always really been drawn to the idea of not necessarily building on somebody else's ministry, which is not a bad thing to do, but I think, where is it, Jai? Where is it, Joel? Sorry,
Romans 15?
Yeah, where is it, Joel? Yeah, Romans 15:20. It's always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation. So that's kind of a funny thing to say in the city, because there's a lot of people who've heard the gospel before, but actually there are a lot of people within our city that actually haven't kind of got it and haven't really connected. So I've already, number one, I don't mind ambiguity, because I like trying to reach out to people who don't know the gospel and try and go to people that aren't like me. So I'm always finding that I have to try and work out how to communicate the gospel effectively and clearly and develop helpful discipleship models for each new context. So I really love that challenge of doing that. And I don't think that's how everyone necessarily sees ministry, and obviously not even in Paul's time. Like Peter was actually building up the church in Jerusalem as Paul went out to preach the gospel amongst the nations. But yeah, I think I really like the idea of reaching out to people who don't know Jesus and to build churches for people who don't go to church. So as a result, that's going to bring a lot of trial and error and a lot of ambiguity. So I feel like it's actually part of the adventure to do that. It can get tiring. The funny thing is, what actually gets tiring is you do something new in a new context and you find out something that works okay. And then after you find that, then you'll have other people come on board who will go, I don't get that. I don't know if that's the way to do it. So the funny thing is, the goal of iterative design is to try and find a new thing that'll work. And you sometimes think to yourself, I think I've found something new that'll work. But then the next challenge is to encourage everybody else who comes along that this actually does work when they've experienced different things elsewhere. So that's actually quite a difficult communication process. I don't know if I'm always good at that, because in that second stage, you've also got to be listening to the new people coming, because they might have a better iteration than you've been able to think of. So the idea for me is it's almost like a cake that you've got to try and layer the cakes, and each level has to build on top of the other. So it's sometimes church planning is a bit like herding cats. There's all these hundreds of ideas and everyone's running off doing stuff. So the difficult part being a pastor is to try and give some shape and form to it without killing off that entrepreneurial spirit of the community. And you don't want to stop people ministering or discourage anyone. And I hate saying to people, I don't know if that'll work, or we tried that and that's not really what we're trying to do, because you do need to have some kind of shape as you move forward. And I sometimes worry, the thing I worry about with Ambiguity is, have I got it right? Have I got the call right? Should I say this is what we do and this is how we do it? Now, it's easy when it comes to the gospel, because if the Bible says it, it's the way it's going to be. But it's more the strategy that's the hard part for me, because I don't want to clip anybody's wings. And sometimes people are just as excited about doing new things as I am, and I don't want them to feel like they're building on my work either. I want them to feel like they can explore. So there's a balance. But then on the other side of the equation is, if you're not present enough in the ministry, people can feel sad too. So I think there's a tightrope walk in church planning, as we all want to give freedom to people to try new things, but also give them some shape, be present with them, but not so much that you stifle them, but also be not so far away that they feel lonely. So, and I think the best way to deal with all those things is through communication and creating spaces for communication. And that's why I love our councils that we've set up at Soul Revival, because I figure that we've got this rhythm of somewhere we come to talk about working on the ministry, not just in the ministry. So we work in the ministry every week, but where are we going? What are we trying to do? I think that what I liked about that gardening analogy is there was a logic to the whole thing. It wasn't a chaotic mess, this jackhammer farming thing. It wasn't like, just get a jackhammer and dig a hole somewhere and throw some seeds. If you look into it, if you're interested later, Syntropic, that's right. Syntropic farming is about order, but it looks very chaotic, and so it looks messy. And to plant a plum tree in the middle of all these weeds is a bit weird, but it works because they're all if all the pieces are working together. So I think church planting is like Syntropic. It's plant something where there's nothing, plant something that will grow where nothing is really growing, and then you can plant what you want to plant into that. And that's what we kind of did with the Bible study at Ryde, and then planted Joey and Mary into that with us, and they've then become part of the ecosystem, and then they've joined into the joy of all this messiness as well. But I've got a passion for starting new things, and I've got a passion for small things that grow. And I think the other reason I'm okay with that is bigger organisations are a bit easier to read. They've got their ways of doing things. It's a bit less thought goes into stuff. It's a bit more relaxing. There's less possibility for conflict in some respects. I suppose other things cause conflict, but if you're not trying to work it out what you're doing all the time, there's less conflict. Whereas if you're working things out all the time, there's the danger of discouraging people or disagreeing not well. There's all those things. But the real beauty of doing something in a small context is so many of us are in small contexts, and for us to start talking about that context as valuable, and that we can do things in the small contexts within the Christian world excites me, because I think if we can get lots of syntropic gardens growing right across the place, that could actually even draw more people for the gospel than a big show where people could feel lost and not really part of something meaningful sometimes too.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say like large organisations have their thing set up, but they're also harder to turn around. Yeah, too. So if it's going in the wrong direction, it's a lot harder to make a
and you see that, don't you? Like with Willow Creek, that was an amazingly successful organisation and church, and that was planted in the 70s by a youth group that then became one of the biggest mega churches in the world under Bill Hybels. And in the 1990s, he came out with his whole team to Sydney, and it's almost like every minister in every church in Sydney went to listen how to do seeker services and how to do this and how to do that. But already by the 90s, I think, talking to their youth minister, Bo Boschers, Willow Creek was already having a bit of a crisis because the whole model they'd set up was based on baby boomers and what they wanted from church. And they wanted a big event with as little cost as possible. And then you get the Gen Xers coming through who wanted community,
just
and they wanted a bit
that,
more messiness and something that wasn't an event that had a bit more substance, and they just left the churches in droves. So I've driven past Willow Creek actually when I went to Chicago last year, and it's still a big church, but I don't think it's as huge as it was, and I don't know that it's as significantly influential in the world scene as it was, because it was kind of like an idea that was hard to turn around. And so what we do like about small things at Solis is we've been able to apply a ministry model to Gen X that then kind of worked with Gen Y, and now we've planted a church with, what are we up to now, millennials, Zoomers,
I don't know.
alphas, whatever they were.
I'm not sure what's next.
I'm a sociologist and I'm already lost. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool to create something that's a bit like a garden that grows and changes and can adapt. And yeah, I think that's really cool. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, just to touch on your ambiguity thing as well. I mean, I think I sometimes struggled with ambiguity when I was younger, and I remember reading something that like action actually reduces ambiguity. Now, that doesn't mean I think like in a ministry context, just going like a bull in a china shop and just start yelling a bit. That's not very pastoral. But it's funny. I think that like as humans, we're experiential learners. We'll actually do something and we go, well, that wasn't right, or that wasn't perfect, or what would I do better next time? So I thought, since you've started, Joey, I suppose there's two questions. Is like, what like looking back, what do you think we did right, or did that worked? What do you think that didn't work? But my other question for that is, we're used to planning churches in the Shire. That's what we'd done before, and then we did Ryde, which is in a very different part of Sydney, almost on the other side of Sydney. What do you think? Because you've been part of the staff for a year and a half, what do you think were the differences there? Why don't we start with that? What do you think the differences were there? And then we can talk about what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah. Differences between some of the Shire.
Yeah, just your observations of like planning in a different part of Sydney.
Yeah. I think one of the first things I noticed was that, I guess particularly looking at the Shire, and because, I grew up in the kind of the northwestern region of Sydney, hadn't been to the Shire too much actually before joining Solis.
Yeah, well, I haven't been too much to Ryde before then either. So that makes sense.
But it was, I guess, interesting to see as I visited some of those other plants, like particularly Yarrawarra, and then coming to Kirrawee as well, the I don't know, tightness, the closeness of the Shire just region and community. I guess I didn't have any too like deep reflections about it, but it was just interesting just seeing how even people in Kirrawee, they came from kind of all over the Shire, and it's kind of close. It's still community. People were like friends from high school, from primary school, and they grew up together, moved to different areas of the Shire, still really close friends, and then still really close friends at church as well, which is really interesting. Whereas maybe this is anecdotal, but just thinking about in the Ryde area or in that northwestern region, it almost has seemed a bit more transient.
It's interesting.
Yeah, people are much more, have moved around just a lot more, and they kind of stay kind of where they've moved out to. They might explore, like go to try a different church in the local area. But that's just some people. I guess there are others who end up, previously my home church was a Chinese church in West Ryde, and people came from, all over Sydney.
Oh, right.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They might have lived in the Ryde area for a bit. They moved because of schooling, because of work. They would have still called that church their home, travelled into it.
So it was like the church was the thing of like what everyone were kind of willing to come back for, whereas in the Shire, for example, it's about the friendships and relationships they've had for a long time.
Yeah, I guess I think that was what I noticed. Like
Right.
that was so, which was really lovely to see that people had known each other for just a long time. They were friends, had grown up together, or had gone to school together, kind of disconnected, but then come back together at church, and it was really lovely to see. Whereas maybe it's just me. I just haven't seen as much of that happen in that area.
Well, it's often called the Insular Peninsula, isn't it?
So,
Which doesn't surprise me. Sometimes, you know how people always at weddings that we go to, like, thanks for coming over the bridge, guys. No.
yeah, right.
I mean, come on.
You get tired of it.
It's a bit of a meme, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's always like, oh, thanks for coming over the Tom Ugly's bridge, guys. And like, it's not that far.
Yeah.
But
I did a bit of research into why that happened.
What? Sorry?
Why people had that sense.
From the bridge. Why?
I've got a theory. The theory is the first train line only came to the Shire in the late 1800s, and then the first road only happened in like the 1910s, 20s, something around like that. And so up till then, the Shire was really isolated, and the only way you could get to the Shire was over a punt.
Yes.
So there was a sense from Shire people that they were isolated and they didn't feel connected to the rest of the city, but they wanted to be. And so it was a long way to go to come to the Shire. And then even after the bridge was built, the road bridge, people in the city didn't tend to think of living in the Shire because it was in the boondocks. So people from the eastern suburbs, for example, would go, if someone like my wife's mum and dad left the eastern suburbs and came to Cronulla and lived in Cronulla, and their whole family was like, what? That'd be like living in like the other side of Australia. Like it was like so far away. How are you going to get to the city? So I think there was this culture built up in the Sutherland Shire of we're further away.
Right.
And they made jokes about the Shire being God's country too, because everyone goes on with that silly joke. But I think that also comes from the fact that it was a tourism location. And so they used to advertise it as God's country because of the beaches and the park to get people to come and visit, because it was a tourism location. So I think those two things combined, and it created a bit of a culture of we really have a beautiful natural environment and we're a long way away. So thanks for coming. It sounds weird now because the city's so connected, but that's where I reckon it comes from. So there you go. You can cut that out of the podcast if you don't think that's relevant.
Keep that. But it actually reminded me of a thing back when we were in at Soli's and when we were at Guymer Anglican, and we created that. There was a bit of like inter suburb rivalry amongst the people. It was all fun and games, but remember there was a game created called Slocker.
We made that up,
which what we talked about on the podcast last week with Braden and Ethan. But and they divided into three different suburbs,
Grace Point and Kirrawee and everybody else.
Yes, and that's where I got stuck. But
Kirrawee and everybody else.
But our friend Chris,
so if you came from Ryde, you're in.
That's right. Well, our friend Chris did a video to kind of promote it. They profiled the different suburbs, and then because he was from Guymer, so the two people that did it lived in Guymer, and they're like, and they did put this voice on it. And it's like, well, if Guymer is, they said, if the Shire is God's country, then Guymer is surely his master bedroom. So it's a funny attitude that we have here, but it makes sense what you're saying about how you're explaining it.
And when you understand areas, it's like that jackhammer principle. Like if you know the soil's a certain kind of soil, you can't just bring another technique to that soil that works somewhere else. And because it works in the Shire, it doesn't mean it'll necessarily work in Ryde. So the way we've kind of broken it down in our own little version of that Syntropic gardening is to talk about, let's have the same theology. Like let's be Reformed evangelical. That's the most important thing. Let's preach Christ crucified and risen from the dead. Let's do that. And then we're all sinners. We need a saviour. Then after we've got that theology in common, we're Reformed evangelical, then the next stage is, what is our strategy? So that form of gardening is a strategy. And I suppose that it works in Lightning Ridge, but as the lady that we saw on the video said, she said it works in other places around the world too. Joe, you were talking about even your experience in one of your projects at uni, you were talking about building gardens in the urban area. Now that'd be different, but a similar kind of thing, which I'd love you to speak to in a sec. But when it comes to how do you take a strategy that is, in our case, an all-age, all-stage approach that's low-key, long-term and relational, and it is an intergenerational approach that really encourages people to have a strong relationship to God and a strong relationship to each other. So we talk about being committed to God and being committed to each other. That's a really important part of what we do. Other ministries are different in their strategy. If you've got a university ministry in a university town, then people are going to be constantly moving through that church. So there won't be that level of commitment to each other. While you're there, there's commitment, but not the long-term relational one. So ours is a particular strategy. So I think for, Joey and Mary, giving them space to think through that strategy, is this something we abide? Is this something we feel convicted to do? It takes time for that to happen. But then out of that theology and that strategy comes your practice of mission and discipleship. And that's where the flexibility comes in. So you take that model of farming or growing stuff, and then you try and do different practices wherever you go. There'll be different plants. Prickly pears might work in the country, but they wouldn't work in the city. I mean, do you mind talking a bit about your project, for example, that you were talking about?
Oh, yeah. I guess at the end of my architecture degree, I was interested in looking at unused spaces, kind of the in-between spaces in urban areas. I think it was during the time, it was before or just on the cusp of the Green Square, Alexandria area being really developed, and now there's high rises everywhere.
Yeah, there is.
But it was just at that kind of moment where a lot of places were being bought out or abandoned, a lot of factories, industrial places that were disused. And so it was kind of like a theoretical project of exploring, what we could do with these spaces, with kind of issues of farming and transportation, the costs of all that was happening around rural New South Wales, kind of exploring, could there be a possibility of urban farming in these in-between spaces in the city, and kind of weaving a narrative of, what that could become in the future of for sustainability, for the environment, for growing your own kind of, probably not everything, but some of your own resources in the spaces where you almost live. So that was kind of a nice kind of alignment with the Syntropic kind of planting, and that's why I was so interested in it. It was just wonderful to hear how organic and natural that kind of method is.
Yeah. And what I love about that is it's symbolic of what we're doing at Ryde and Kirrawee, that we've got something that is growing a garden at Kirrawee and does the same strategy and theology, lead to some practices that'll look differently, but does the same kind of idea that'll look really different in the city or the bush, Kirrawee or Ryde. Does it actually help to create something new in that section? Because the experiment is, if we could do something different in Ryde and Kirrawee. I mean, Sutherland Shire is primarily Anglo still, and it's exciting to have people of predominantly Chinese background in another part of Sydney saying, let's see if we can build a similar concept. And what then happens is we learn from each other, because we're both trying to do the same thing. I think we've learnt more from Ryde than we've actually shared with you guys. Like, you've taught us heaps, mate. And you're a really, really high level thinker, and you're very humble and godly, and you're prayerful, and you're reading your scriptures, and you're basing everything on the gospel, but you're also really excited about investing a lot of thought into how to help people to get to know Jesus. And again, have the same, let's do something from scratch. Let's not build on, in a very real way, you guys aren't building on our ministry, you're starting your own ministry to a group of people, but using a similar framework. And if we can do that, I mean, it might be something we can come back to in the podcast or end with, but we're starting to talk to, we've been friends with Aboriginal Christians out in Western New South Wales for a long time, but after 10 years of Soul Revival Church, we're starting to think, could we do more in practical partnership with the Northwestern New South Wales, and what of the things that we're learning between Kirrawee and Ryde could be helpful out bush, because they've already helped us with our approach, because we wouldn't do dinners at church if it wasn't for them. We wouldn't do the intergenerational stuff with so much confidence if it wasn't for their model of us. So in many ways, our model here in Sydney has already kind of transplanted from the bush. So could we also be kind of sharing ideas backwards and forwards there? So we're pretty excited about giving confidence to groups of people in small spaces, in small churches, that the action is in the church, and you don't have to just be a big church to be something that can be learnt from. There's a lot to be learnt from each other in smaller contexts. And the other thing I'm excited about is maybe we could connect up our smaller contexts together a bit more, which would be really good as well.
Well, I would like it that you brought up the idea of, like, the theology is always the same. The strategy is the same most of the time in the practice where it's flexible, and we've talked about that before, but I've been to Ryde a few times, and I really, really love going there because I still feel like I'm at a Soul Revival church.
Yeah,
there's people at different location, people from different backgrounds, people I don't know as well, but I still feel like that was something that I really noticed last time we were there. It was like, oh, this still feels like church. It's still different, but it was like, I'm so glad I came. And my kids love going.
But it's not just a franchise, is it? I mean, there's some things we have in common, but it doesn't feel like a franchise either, does it?
It's of the area as well, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that's what's exciting.
I wonder if it's the relationship between the leadership that actually makes that too, because we all work really hard. Like the guys at Ryde particularly work hard at coming down to Kirrawee. We go
last Saturday they did the same thing.
Yeah, they did last Saturday. So I think the relationships are part of that. But I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah. Well, definitely. I think, like, as you were saying, the principles, the vision, and the strategy. Actually, I think that's really what helps hold kind of things together. The theology that we share, which is wonderful, and I think shapes, God's word, helping to shape the congregation. and it is the practice bit, the expressions of how those strategies unfold. They probably bring about the wonderful kind of differences in how we bring the gospel to bear into that area, to Ryde and to Meadowbank, which forms part of the ambiguity. Which is a really nice way to come back to it, is the flexibility.
That's good.
And sometimes, you're asking questions about, we have the theology and we have the strategy, but how are we going to get into this kind of density of apartments down by the water in Meadowbank?
Exactly.
How do we reach out to the people? How do we see the gospel preached to the lost with these same strategies of sharing the truth and love of Jesus?
So true.
But needing to find different ways because it's so kind of different from the Shire, and so many people, it's so transient. So many people moving in to Meadowbank for different reasons, for education, for work, and I think that's been.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
because Meadowbank is a reasonably a highly expanding area because they built so many apartment blocks there too, right?
Yeah, just in the recent 6, 7, 8 years. Yeah.
And that's I think the practice is where you go. I mean, the strategy is let's plant weeds, and I think this is just me thinking out loud, but the strategy is let's plant weeds, but the practice is there's different weeds that grow in different areas. So that just occurred to me that where Joey wouldn't have used prickly pear in the city urban gardens that he was designing, and vice versa. So what is the weeds in Meadowbank?
Yeah, what's the noxious weed?
What grows? What grows?
What
grows? So it'd be silly to go, let's do a surf school in Meadowbank. As fun as that would be.
On the Parramatta River.
On the Parramatta River. Because there's no surf. So at the same, so what is it? But then there's parks in Meadowbank like there is in Kirrawee, and I mean there's places to meet people. So I think that's really cool. Sorry, I interrupted.
No.
Yeah.
You were kind of talking about the future, Joey, but I was just wondering, since you've been on staff, been at Ryde, I said it before, but we haven't really talked about it yet, but what would you do you think that did right? That we definitely should have done. What shouldn't we not have done? And then maybe we can talk more about what's also coming in the future. We can get more into that.
Yeah. What do we do right? Well, there were just, I think we particularly when I came in, I think I came in almost a bit sideways. The group had already been there. A lot of relationships and friendships already formed. And so in a really great way, you kind of hit the ground running in terms of those relationships. So because friendship is such a core thing as part of Solis, we hit the ground running. The Bible study.
Yeah, you did.
Supported one another throughout COVID. They loved each other, served each other when people were sick, and kind of got through the really difficult time of COVID. And they were growing through that in number and in maturity as well. And so when they planted and located in Ryde, and when I came in, it was wonderful to see that those relationships were already there. There was a community that had formed. There was a lot of love in that community. One of those core values of Solis, and I think there was already almost a culture that we're trying to continue to foster, but this culture of inviting their colleagues and their friends, this culture of evangelism, really.
It was,
and a real heart that was led by the core team.
It was,
but I think it flowed through, and I think that was a great place to start.
As we often say, leaders as friends first.
Yeah, that's right.
For people to be welcomed into.
Yeah, and can I encourage you too in that, because and my Aboriginal friends tell me that we're a bit like them in this, that because we love Grace and Ian and Michelle and everyone, Louisa and Wing, and we were friends with them, and because Ian loved you, because I loved Ian and trusted Ian, I loved and trusted you. So I think that was a really nice strategy that we had, that friendship isn't just based on you and I have things in common, but it's actually you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, we're brothers, we're already reconciled, so we can be committed to each other in Christ and just learn how to express that rather than have to build that friendship. I think that's a really cool thing that was happening, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something you think that maybe we shouldn't have done that?
Heaps of things.
Which is a good sign. I think you do them, you go, don't do them again. But any that stick out?
Well, I like to think about it more as, I guess, lessons learned. I think that's a helpful way of the iterative process of kind of, and I think that's the mindset almost a church planter needs to go in with, is to have this experimental kind of framework, at least at the very beginning, and to go, well, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to test things out. We're going to do that together as friends, and I think it was helpful to be backed by Stu and the staff team, for me to be in touch with, other people who were aligned in terms of the gospel, in terms of what we were doing. And I think, so all that to say, there were lessons learned. I think I've been sharing with Stu that, because we came in and the location had already been found, there was already a move to meet in a place.
Yep.
And I guess it was just how God worked. Previously, even the core team members, they had invited some other friends and families to come join, and some of them did, and then some of them didn't. And I think as we've been going along, God's been really kind. He's been adding people slowly, and particularly this year, more people visiting, more people thinking about being on mission with us in the area. But I think early on we were feeling like, oh, okay, we've got about 20 people who are regularly coming, and it might have, and I think we were comfortable with that, but it might have been just even a bit helpful to have a few more people along for the ride at the beginning point.
Yep.
Yeah.
The ride at Ryde.
The ride. Yeah.
That's why I laugh. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. And I guess particularly with just another family there, for a young family like us coming in.
Yeah.
But we've grown through that, and I think God has used that, even as we say, there's lessons learnt there. I think we went in with our eyes open, like we knew what was happening there, and but yeah, there are things I think where, in terms of just resources, in terms of people serving, and as we started setting up and experimenting with different things, it might have been good to have, we would love to have those people who had been invited to come join us, but they had good reasons not to, and that's all part of church planting. Yeah.
Last question before we wrap up the episode. You spoke briefly about Meadowbank and how it's important to get in there and figure out how the best way to spread the gospel there. Yeah. Any other thoughts around that? You were showing us a photo of a little coffee cart van thing that you wanted to get, because we have the caravan here at Sorreville that we use for Yarrawarra and other things. Yeah. But we were thinking something similar. Is that what your next research project is? To find something that we can afford and make happen?
Perhaps, yeah. Like, that'd be exciting to have. Cost money.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's just one of the many things, just like ways of being involved in the community there. There's kind of Ryde markets just down the road that happens every fortnight. So just being a presence in the community. We've been trying to think a lot more about how do we just get to know our neighbours. A few of us kind of live in that area, and that's great. It'd be lovely to have more people living in that space amongst the people we're trying to reach. But I think and also recently we've been just doing a bit of training about thinking about how to engage with our community, how to share the gospel. So we've just been each week just doing the simple things of praying for the people who we live next to, the barista that we're seeing, the baker who's down the road from us, and helping our team think about different ways of being in the community, building friendships there. And I think, where God has us now is that we've been kind of doing a lot of experimentation, and at this point, I think we've steadied out a bit, and we're thinking just that bit more about about evangelism and getting into the community now.
Yeah, it was cool. You mentioned to me earlier or to us earlier that you were doing a letterbox drop, and then you were just praying for the entire apartment block that you just dropped.
Yeah.
To be honest, maybe to my detriment, but I never thought of that. And I thought that's a good way to start, isn't it?
I think that's a good example of, like I said, that last year we were all over the shop a little bit. So one of the good things about this year is we've got back to our goal setting where we can plan and then we can review each term as a church. So this term for the whole church is raising up personal evangelists. Yep. And then we've said, let's all increase our evangelism across the whole church, which is, we've got this saying at Soul Revival, let's share the truth and love of Jesus. But how many of us do actually feel equipped to do that? And how many of us are actually doing it? So after we spent the first part of the year building our teams, to get back to something that looked a bit like what we were before COVID, with more people involved in ministry and more meetings that actually work. Now we have, the whole church is kind of being able to say, all right, let's reach out. And so, all the things we're doing now is focusing on evangelism till the rest of the year. And so the great example of how Ryde looks different to Kirrawee is they're actually door knocking the units and praying outside the units. At Yarrawarra, they're doing church in a car park where people can just pull in and get a coffee. Down at Cronulla, we're trying to look for a new location that puts us more in the community so that we can be more visible. Kirrawee, we're talking about how do we get more happening in the Brick Pit, the South Village apartments across the road. So we've already got some stuff going on it's been going on for a year with our young people just kicking a ball across the road in the park, and a whole heap of teenagers have joined with that. So how do we as churches just do it together, but all do it kind of differently? It's almost like our gardens are all at different points, and so some of us are just started, some of us not. Yeah. I think the other thing too is the gardening analogy is really good, because sometimes some of the plants will be dying because there's not something over the top of them, so they need a canopy. And I think one of the challenges in Australia is, in a place where there's not as many people to send out in church planting, how do you do it in a small, cost-effective way? But one of the problems I've found is that that if you're not willing to take risks and try new things, then sometimes you just sit back and don't do anything. So I think not doing anything is more dangerous than actually trying some things and doing things. And I think the thing that I'm really amazed at with Joey and Mary is they've just come straight out of college and they've gone straight into a church plant, and they're a young family. They don't even have any other young family. So look, they're not going to live overseas in a really difficult part of the world where they don't know the language and stuff. But in many ways, they are really pioneering missionaries that are willing to work together. So from my point of view, I feel a great deal of admiration, and they model to me to continue to be fresh and trust in the Spirit,
and faithful,
and read the Word, and let's see this as a spiritual endeavour and not do it in our own strength. And so watching you, Joey, be a good father and be a good husband and also be a church planter, and you see life holistically. I think your little gardening project in that that time when you were envisaging gardening back in the day sort of says to me you do have a lot of entrepreneurial ideas that you're doing. But the last thing I'd say too in that is that the benefit of teamwork is I feel like, as I said before, you guys are giving more back to us than we feel like we're giving to you. So it's a really beautiful thing to be doing stuff in team. And I think where there are small churches around or small youth ministries around that are feeling the pinch of, I just feel like we're by ourselves, and it's just really lonely. I think we need new ways of connecting up smaller ministries together so that we can be networking and working together, because I think there's a lot of people being reached for the gospel in small churches and small youth ministries, and I think that's incredibly valuable and beautiful. And there's actually missionaries all over the place in the midst of these places we all grew up in, but are trying to actually rethink how to do ministry in our generation, because the older ways of doing things kind of don't always produce the same fruit. And sometimes it's a little bit like trying to take the banana tree and plonk it straight in the middle of the desert. It feels a bit like that. But I think there's all these people around the place that are all thinking, how do we do this differently? And I'm really excited about that. I think the future looks bright to me in Sydney and other places in the world where at the moment it looks like Christianity's on retreat, but there's people faithfully standing for Christ in their neighbourhoods, and I think that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It sounds like we talked about the woman who's doing the syntropic farming. She said she'd been doing something for years and years in the traditional way, and then had to find a different way. And I think that's what you're speaking to there.
Yeah, we should go to Sweden, see if they've got any ideas.
Switzerland, wasn't he?
No, was he
Swiss? I think.
Swiss.
Yep.
We should go to Swiss.
We can go to Sweden too.
We should go to Switzerland.
Go for a tour.
Yeah,
we go to Switzerland.
Switzerland,
I've been to Switzerland.
Yeah.
The water's really nice.
That's the
glacier.
main reason to go.
Mountains.
They melt the glaciers.
Alps.
It's really nice water.
I'm sure it would be very good.
Paddocks, lots of cows.
Anyway, let's wrap up the episode. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's been really
Thanks,
cool to
Joe.
get you on. We'll keep getting you on more regularly so we can
Yeah,
keep hearing
I
how
agree.
you're going planting and Ryde. And
Heaps of wisdom.
yeah, heaps of wisdom, how we're going to keep moving forward. So that's really
Makes
exciting. If you do have any questions, if you're listening, thank you for listening, first of all, or watching. If you do have any questions about growing what you can grow now so you can grow what you want to grow later, hit us up. Send me an email at joel@strugglesOrbit.com.au and we can chat about it on the podcast, or you can drop a comment on our YouTube channel as well if you like. And thank you, as always, to producer Ek, who always puts these videos and podcasts together for us. And once again, thank you, Stu and Joey.
Thank you, Joel.
Very, very much appreciated. And we'll finish with one way.
All right.